Hi friends, I welcome back to all into my YouTube channel Literature Insights. If you have not subscribed my YouTube channel Literature Insights yet, so please subscribe it by pressing the bell icon button on your screen for getting further notification of my videos. In my last tutorial, we have seen the sonnet as a significant form or type of poetry in English literature. In today's tutorial, I am going to explain you another significant form or type of poetry, the ballad. So in this tutorial I will explain you origin of the ballad, meaning of the ballad, structure of the ballad, types of the ballad, features of the ballad, and some of the best examples of ballad poems in English literature. So let's see in detail one by one. So now here the first point is origin of the ballad. So for the learners of English literature, it is important to know the etymology of the ballad. The ballad belongs to French province or country. Ballad is a type of poetry or verse which was basically used in a dance songs in ancient France. Ballad spreads in European nations during the late 16th and 17th centuries. So it was flourished at the time of 16th and 17th century, and it reached its peak during the romantic period of 19th century. The word ballad is taken from the Latin word ballare, which means a dancing song. The ballad poetry lost its popularity during the half 19th century. Meaning of the ballad. So in this point, I have defined some of the general definitions of ballad. The ballad is a short narrative poem which is intended to be sung with the musical tune in a short stanzas in a praise or adventures of a brave or a gallant man. Ballad is a specific form of narrative poem which became a part of the larger folk song. Now here is a definition of F.B. Gum, who has explained the definition of the ballad as a poem meant for singing, quite impersonal in material, probably connected in its origin with the communal dance, but submitted to a process of oral tradition among people who are free from literary influences and fairly homogeneous in character. So in this definition we can find that ballad meant for singing, the main purpose is singing, and it is quite impersonal or objective in element or in material. It is probably connected in its origin with the communal dance but submitted to the process of oral tradition among people who are free from literary influences and they are fairly homogeneous in character. The structure of the ballad. So it is significant to know the structure of the ballad. How does it compose? A typical ballad consists of stanzas that contain a quatrain or four poetic lines. So now here a ballad has a stanza of four lines called quatrain. The meter or rhythm of each line is usually iambic foot, which means it has one stressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. In ballads, there are usually 8 or 6 syllables in a line. The ballads are narrative, which means they tell or narrate a story. Every ballad has a refrain, or some ballads do not have. So now refrain means it is a repetition of a phrase or a line after a quatrain or a stanza. So now here the specific rhyme scheme of ballad is often AB, which creates a musical effect. Then types of ballads. There are two major types of ballad, the traditional ballad and literary ballad. So let's see. Number one, the traditional ballad is also called as folk ballad. The traditional or folk ballad was developed by anonymous poet in the ancient times. It handed down to our generation by word of mouth, so it became a mouthpiece. It has no written form, it has an oral form of narration. The traditional ballad was famous in England and Scotland during the 15th century or after Middle Ages, when the ministers declining their social status and circulation began to carry a wider audience their narrative art in a folk songs based on strong symmetrically constructed stories in a simplified 4 lines stanza. The traditional ballad were sung at every level of society by non-professionals or illiterate one also. By the end of 17th century, the emphasis of the ballad is shifted to the music, used reference and meaningless vocables or vocabulary like fel and lal, commonplaces and formula narrated filler lines to give time to arrange the next stanza, the peculiarity of effective structure known as incremental repetition. So here is the term incremental repetition is very important. By the end of 17th century, the emphasis of the ballad is shifted to the music. For the musical effect, ballad used reference, so meaningless vocables is added for some effect, and commonplaces and formula is explained in that ballad. Filler lines to give time to arrange the next stanza for the speaker or the narrator, and this peculiarity of the effective structure is known as incremental repetitions. The traditional ballad became admired literary objects in the 18th century. Numerous collections made and published such as Francis J. Child's 5 volumes of the English and Scottish popular ballads. Number 2, Thomas Percy's Relics of an Ancient English Poetry. Sir Walter Scott's Minstrels of Scottish Borders. Another type of ballad, literary ballad. The Romantics were interested in the literary ballad as a folk art and a monument or a memory of the heroic past. So it was popular during the period of Romanticism. There were a number of poets get mastery over this poetic form of poetry and using it as a folk art and monuments for the heroic past of the persona. The literary ballads with no music. So now here we can find some kind of the difference between traditional ballad and literary ballad. So it is appeared in the new form or some modifications with no music. The basic difference between traditional and literary ballad is about authorship. So it is very significant to know the author of the literary ballad is always well-known persona or personality, and the author of traditional ballad is anonymous or unknown person. The author of the traditional ballad may be a common man, a shepherd, a farmer, a villager, and an illiterate person. But the author of literary ballad is a well-known persona who has a legal rights of his literary ballads. Literary ballads are more polished and lengthy in compared to traditional ballads. John Keats, S.T. Coleridge, William Wordsworth and many other poets excelled or used in a craftsmanly this form of poetry in their literature or work of art. The best known examples of literary ballad is Coleridge, The Rime of Ancient Mariner, John Keats, La Belle Dame Sans Merci are the best examples of literary ballad. Then features of ballad. So now here let's see one by one the features or characteristics of the ballad. So number 1, simple language. The traditional ballads were composed for illiterate audiences or non-specialist hearers or readers. Therefore, the language of the ballad can be easily understood by the people without any special knowledge or training. When the poets choose to write ballad by considering their intended or targeted audience, they use simple and lucid language for their comprehension and understanding. The ballads are simple in structure, style and diction. Due to this simplicity, the ballad become a popular form of poetry in literature. The poet makes use of day-to-day and common words instead of bombastic and flowery language in the ballad. So this is called a colloquial language. John Keats makes use of this colloquial language in his most famous ballad in Romantic period in literature, La Belle Dame Sans Merci. Then second feature is stories. The ballad tends to be narrative poem. Every ballad tells story as opposed to lyric poem which appeals to the emotions of the speaker. Every ballad has a short story in verse which narrates a particular episode of a story of particular persona. Therefore, it is certainly every ballad has a single story in a ballad and the poet needs to complete this story within a limits of a small number of stanzas. So now here is an example of this feature is John Keats' ballad La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. Then repetition. A ballad has a refrain, the repeated section that divides a segments of the story. The refrain is a phrase or line which is repeated again and again after the stanza or quatrain. Many ballads employ incremental repetition in which phrase recurs with minor differences and the story moves forward or progresses. Then fourth characteristics or features is dialogue. Dialogue is one of the significant features of ballad poem because the story always narrated in the form of dialogue. It is a narrative genre which often incorporate multiple characters in the stories. For example, John Keats' La Belle Dame Sans Mercies is a complete dialogue between the speaker and the knight throughout his poem. Then third person objective narrative. The poet usually narrates a story objectively in a third person narration. They are usually speaking about third person, their deeds, their bravery, their adventurous and their gallant, but they do not comment on their reactions to the emotional content of the ballad. Then use of supernatural element. The use of supernatural element is a prominent feature of ballad. We can find these supernatural elements in the ballads of John Keats and S.T. Coleridge. Theme of the ballad. The theme of the ballad is usually tragic and it deals with the serious subject matter. In exception, there are some ballads which are comic in nature. So these are the significant features of ballad in literature. So with the help of these features, we can easily understand the ballad. Then examples of ballad. So here I have given some of the best examples of ballad poem in literature. Nut Brown Maid and Chevy Chase Anonymous, written by unknown author. So it is a traditional ballad. La Belle Dame Sans Mercy by John Keats. It is a significant ballad in romantic period in literature. The Rime of Ancient Mariner by S.T. Coleridge is also a remarkable ballad in literature. The Ballad on the American War, Robert Burns. The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. So these are the best examples of ballad poem in English literature. So with these I stop here. If you have any queries or questions or problem on this tutorial of the ballad, you comment me in my comment box. I will try to answer your queries, questions or problems. So if you have not subscribed my YouTube channel Literature Insights yet, so please subscribe it, share and like my videos among your friends for getting further notification of my videos.